Chaplaincy is a privilege. So on a campus or even in the military, the chaplain is available. They're not forcing themselves on people. He's on the inside. He or she knows what's going on. They are the number one source of intelligence if anything ever goes wrong.
Welcome to the Glory Hour where spirit meets culture. And, we love to have culturally relevant conversations from a spiritual perspective. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of you who've been part of the Glory Journey team, that have been with us every step of the way. And you know what? If this is your first time joining us or your 12th time joining us, because this is episode 12, just want to say I'm so glad that you are with me today. And, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Glory Hour on Cornerstone Television Network's YouTube channel. And big news too, we're also now streaming on Spotify. So if you're at the gym, if you're working out, or wherever you are, make sure that you go find the Glory Hour on Spotify and you can listen to us there. Well, I am really looking forward to our conversation that we're going to be having today and the topic at hand, because we are going to be talking about the state of education and a solution one organization is implementing to address the spiritual state and mental health crisis of youth in schools. If you are a parent, if you are a grandparent, or anyone that is connected or loves a young person who is maybe in kindergarten or in elementary school, middle school, high school, and they're in a public school, this is definitely a conversation you want to listen to, because education is such a profound fabric in our culture, and what's going on in our schools is really alarming. There's so many things that are happening. We're seeing going on in the news about some of the things that they're instituting in schools, some of the things that young people are facing. And so I'm really excited because in a moment, you're going to meet and hear from Malloy. He is the CEO and founder of the National School Chaplain Association. And you are going to really want to hear what we're going to get into and talk about, because did you know this? This is something I started researching and I find it very interesting. Maybe you didn't know this was going on, but right now there are more than a dozen states looking into legislation to bring chaplains to public schools. Listen to this. In 2023, just last year, Texas passed a bill allowing public schools to employ or have volunteers that would be chaplains. So you can, in Texas, you can, volunteer your services or you can be employed. And earlier this month, Florida proposed a bill for volunteer school chaplains, and there's similar proposals that are gaining momentum across the country. And one of the main reasons that this whole conversation is happening, there's just a real big push right now to bring chaplains into public schools, is really the challenges that are facing youth in schools today. So let's take a look. We're going to pull up a full screen that you can see the different things that young people are dealing with today. The first one is mental health. Some of the things that they're dealing with is depression, anxiety, and suicide. I was reading that the U.S. Surgeon General is saying it's an epidemic what's going on with our young people. They're just dealing with this in astronomical proportions, and this was really exasperated in wake of the pandemic. It was going on during the pandemic. Even prior to that, health experts were saying this was an issue that a lot of young people are facing, and it is just at an all-time high. Another challenge that's facing the youth is social media. No big surprise there. I just think about when I was growing up that, Facebook and different things was coming about when I was in college, but I could not imagine. I mean, can you think about it for a minute? If you're a boomer, Gen Xer, millennial, okay, with Gen Z, that they are dealing with social media in ways that we can't even fathom. That is just really eye-opening. The other thing that they are dealing with, this is something that we have seen since Columbine, which was 2001, all the way up to now, is mass violence. There's school shootings. I could not imagine, the fear of being a student and not knowing something could pop off, something could go down. They're having drills now for students to prepare for shootings that are happening, in the classroom during the school day. Another thing that they're saying that the kids are dealing with is natural disasters. We're just seeing things on a different scale that are happening. Just even if you look at the past year and just certain tornadoes and storms that are going on, that can be really scary for kids. Also, We know we're in a political year and in election season, political polarization. It is stressful. Think about how much it is dividing our country, dividing our nation, and even with children that are stressed about it. And the other thing that I was reading, that if you just think about for any of us, we know the ups and downs that comes with just being an adolescent, just being a kid, growing up in the world, figuring yourself out. So you put all these different factors together. Children right now, the kids that are going to school, are dealing with things that sometimes we don't really necessarily understand. And that's why I personally feel having chaplain, having someone that you can go to for extra support and for care, that if you're dealing with something, personally, if you're dealing with any trauma, or just somebody to talk to, is a really big help. I think about the people that I've been able to talk to when I was growing up in school, that maybe I could open up to them about, that it wasn't about the work I'm doing in the classroom with math or science or English or reading or social studies, but things that I'm really dealing with as a person. And so, one thing that's interesting, because when I was thinking about this topic, and as we're about to dive into it with our conversation with Rocky Malloy, is chaplains are in a lot of different spheres and spaces. You think of professional sports teams like the NFL, we see it with the baseball teams, we see it all the sports teams. They have chaplains. About the military, all the branches of the military, they have chaplains. I mean, if you think about it, they are in combat, they're in war, they're in battle, they're seeing things. Sometimes I think it's hard for us, to even fathom or imagine for those that are serving our country. But when they see those things, right, and they have to live with it and deal with it, it's their job, but it really affects them. A lot of them we see, with wars, dealing with PTSD and things of that nature. Hospitals. Think about in hospitals, families, loved ones are dealing with life and death situations every day and need someone to talk to. And you may be experiencing this. I have a dear friend that she's actually functions as a chaplain for a major corporation in the United States and around the world, but the corporate world has chaplains. So I want to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts about chaplains in public schools? Be sure to leave a comment in the chat. If you're watching The Glory Hour on YouTube, you can also send us an email at thegloryhour@ctvn.org. Would love to hear your thoughts, love to know what you're thinking about it. Are you in favor of it? Are you not? Are you opposed to it? I know there's both sides of the conversation that is happening right now. For me, I personally think, I think it's actually really a beautiful thing. I think kids do need people to talk to. I do believe that chaplains would be a great thing to just go and to talk to someone, to turn to someone, because I have friends that have children that are in elementary, middle school, and high school, and the way that they are describing the climate and the culture of what's going on, especially in the public school system, is alarming. And so I just think it's really a beautiful thing that chaplains could be a solution to the crisis that's happening in the classrooms, the crisis that is going on, within and during the school hours. When we think about just even what comes in my mind, and the Holy Spirit is just dropping this in my spirit, we think about bullying. Bullying is a really big thing, with social media and just kids going to school, kids being afraid, to interact and deal with their peers because they're being mean. And also when we see the astronomical levels of suicide, I just think of what would it look like if a young person had someone to talk to, like, hey, I'm really going through this. Like, I want to take my own life. I mean, I just think we got to do something, and we are called, especially as Christians, to be the light in the midst of the darkness. And, I know there's a lot of parents, maybe you are homeschooling your child because you see the state of the public school system, or maybe you're sending your child to a Christian or a private school. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I also think, though, as someone, I grew up in public school, I grew up in public education, I do have a heart for those kids and those students, because, God sees them and they matter on his heart. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation with Rocky Malloy to get more into and a greater understanding of chaplains coming into public schools. There's so many that are actually already functioning in that space and arena. And I think it's going to be a really insightful conversation we're going to have, that you're going to glean a lot and learn a lot about the movement and the momentum that is happening right now as we are speaking and you're watching this in state legislators. The National School Chaplain Association is currently the world's largest provider of school chaplains for more than 23 countries and 30,000 schools. The organization's founder and CEO, Rocky Malloy, is a former drug smuggling pirate saved by divine intervention. And for more than 20 years, Malloy and the NSCA has been on a mission equipping chaplains to provide care and support to students and public schools. Rocky, I'm so glad to have you on the Glory Hour today.
Thank you, Sydney. That's quite the intro.
I know, and I know we're going to get more into your story in just a moment, but really want to dive into what your organization is doing, which is truly incredible. So, can you tell us first about the National School Chaplain Association, how it started, and what you do? And truly, it's incredible how God is using you in this hour.
Well, we recruit, train, and certify people to be a school chaplain. And we, as you mentioned, we work in several countries overseas. And recently, the state of Texas used that data to support a chaplain's bill, which was signed into law. Now, many other states are following that same example.
That's incredible. So let's talk a little bit about, what's happening in different states and this new momentum that's going on to bring chaplains into public schools. Talk to us more about that.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of confusion because I'm an expert witness many times in the Senate and House of these different states and school board meetings and things like that. And the group that does not want a God witness in school, I think they need a lot of prayer because these are the LGBTQ people. These are the people that feel marginalized by their decisions. We're not talking about, classic racism or things like that. We're talking about people that have made alternative life decisions and they've decided they don't want a God witness in school because they feel like it would marginalize them, but really exposes their ignorance of chaplains because chaplains reduce bullying and all types of violence in school. And so they should be the proponents of it.
And so talk to us more about get us familiar with, we hear chaplains because, I just mentioned earlier for the Glory Hour that we hear about chaplains in professional sports teams. We see them in hospitals. We see them even in corporate America. We see them in different spheres and sectors of society. So when it comes to a chaplain in a public school, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis that many of us are probably not familiar with?
Well, the reason chaplains are so common, just as you alluded to, in the military and everywhere else, is because they're professionals that provide spiritual care in a secular environment. A lot of people don't understand how this does not breach or violate the separation clause of the First Amendment. Well, because chaplains are God representatives, they're not church representatives. So when they move into a system, even though the vast majority of chaplains are Christians, if they meet let's say a Muslim student or a teacher, and they would hopefully have an imam that has already agreed to speak with that person. A big part of our problem are finding rabbis and imams and others to participate. So a chaplain would work to meet the spiritual needs of a person, no matter what their faith background was.
So even talking about this, Rocky, because thinking about just the climate today in the classrooms and in schools, there's a lot that's going on with mental health. We see that suicide is at an all-time high with young people. And when it comes to depression and anxiety, there's things with social media. There's a lot of things that young people are facing that a lot of us, I know, like your generation, even in my generation as a millennial, we're not facing the same thing. So what are some ways that a chaplain is able to provide specific care and support for a student that is dealing with some of those issues?
There's a thing called hope. It's actually called the science of hope, where there is a goal and then there's a pathway or an agency to achieve that goal. And then the goal would be such that you would have the willpower to accomplish it. And so just think of all the kind of tests out there. Your level of hope, which can easily be scored, if in a child just 6 questions, an adult 8 questions, is the best predictor of your future performance. So chaplains bring hope, and that's very different than like a school counselor that, there's so much to it. Sometimes I get stuck on all the different ways to do it, but mental health is a huge issue now. Just as you mentioned, depression, suicide, all these things are at all-time highs. Number one cause of death is suicide in most states. In Texas and other states, second leading cause of death, which is horrific. We had a girl the other day, 6 years old, killed herself because didn't want to be a boy. They told her in school she could be a boy. She didn't want to be a boy. She's a little 6-year-old kid. It was so sad. So there's so many things happening in school that actually cause mental illness. People don't realize that. There's a lady named Dr. Lisa Miller. She happens to be a Jewish lady. She's a research scientist at University of Columbia, and she has clinical evidence that not receiving spiritual care as provided by chaplains actually causes mental illness. So healthy teachers and students are going to school, and because there's no spiritual care provided, they're going home with mental problems.
Wow. Wow. Just when you just like, I'm just taking a moment when you talk about a 6-year-old girl just like took her own life. I think that is just, it's heart wrenching and it just leaves you numb because she is one of so many of thousands of students and children that are ending their lives. And I just think of, I think about that little girl, like what was going on, what was happening in her mind, even for that thought of suicide to come inside her mind. Like it just really breaks my heart of what we're seeing is really impacting our young people, and something needs to be done. And I'm just really thankful for your organization because you're stepping in to be a solution. So can you talk to us a little bit about, your equipping process with the chaplains? Because I saw on your website that you have more than 30,000 chaplains in the US, correct, and around the world?
Well, we have really over 30,000, but we work in 30,551 schools right now. And the process overseas looks quite a bit different because all the countries we work in are constitutionally Catholic nations. So catechisms, and a lot of these countries went communist, so they took it out, but it didn't take that completely out of their constitution. So chaplains in those countries operate very different than they operate in the United States, and the process is different. But in the United States, in order to qualify for training, you have to have a bachelor's degree or 2-year biblical education, 2,000 hours of actual pastoral care. Then we do an extensive background, international, national, state. We do a forensic background check on social media. Then you have to have letters of reference from your pastors, employers, character references. Then we do 80 hours of training from a university that's recognized by the Department of Education. Then we do FBI training and other things to prepare a chaplain so that they could be a safety officer or provide medical assistance and other things.
That's incredible. You do such a thorough check because I was even reading on the news, like some people were, when it comes to chaplains, are not sure or, with the background, but it's just really beautiful that you are doing the deep, thorough work to make sure that not just anybody's getting into the school, not just anybody's just spreading and spewing some crazy ideology, but you really do a thorough check to make sure the students are in good hands. And, Rocky, I was just like curious and just thinking about, can you share just some stories with us of just the impact? Because, the NSCA has been around for more than 20 years. So what has it been like for you to see the impact and how God has even moved in the midst of this with the chaplains?
Well, in a perfect world, everybody in education on a campus, they have their jobs, and it's no one's job to care for the spiritual well-being of that campus. And here's one example. The chaplain is one of their traditions is to welcome teachers and students coming to school, and they're observing who's dropping children off or how they come to school, how they're dressed. Sometimes if a child that has their lunch every day when they don't have a lunch. And so chaplains are like resource officers, are helping children, maybe get their lunch in some cases, but in this one particular case, a little girl that she walked to school, she started coming late, and that wasn't her habit to be late. So about the second or third day of being late, the chaplain asked her why she was late, and she said that she had to find something to eat, which was, she was going through other people's leftovers or maybe trash or whatever. And so when the chaplain asked her for more information, she said, well, my mother was killed at work. It was a single parent household. It was her and her brother. She was in third grade. Her brother was in eighth grade. And so the chaplain got in touch with her brother. The school officials said, "Look, we got a little girl, but she was only really just days away from being a street child. And once they hit the street, there's a whole nother scenario." So the chaplain intervened. They found an uncle in another city. So the last report we got, her and her brother were living with their uncle in another city going to school. But if that chaplain had not intervened, those kids would have been on the street. And then all other kinds of things happen to little kids on the street. So this is one example of what chaplains do. In North Texas, chaplain sees girls, 6 girls, being picked up by the same car. They're not sisters. Every day, something's wrong. Chaplain gets in touch with the sheriff, finds out it's a sex trafficking right there in North Texas.
Wow. Wow. That just really puts it in perspective. Like the first story you just shared about this young girl, she's hungry. And then there's these 6 girls getting in this car and there's human trafficking. And I just feel that, Rocky, as you're just speaking and talking, is you're really painting a picture of really the crisis that's going on in public schools. There's a lot of children that need rescue. There's a lot of children that are walking in darkness. And so what are your thoughts? And has God even laid anything in your heart, from the 20 years that you've been doing this? Because I'm sure, it's changed. Education has changed. The problems and the issues have changed. So what has God really spoken to you in your heart, in your spirit, when it comes to really going out in the midst of the public schools? Is it a new mission field?
Well, you have to be careful with this because chaplaincy is a privilege. So on a campus or even in the military, the chaplain is available. They're not forcing themselves on people. But, the chaplain, he's on the inside. He or she knows what's going on. They are the number one source of intelligence if anything ever goes wrong. I just had a meeting with a security team just a few days ago, and they said, your chaplain is the highest source of trusted intelligence on a campus. So I was in a meeting a while back, and there was a sheriff there that was the president of the National Sheriff's Association. And he said, the chaplain is the best source of information if something would go wrong. Well, there was superintendents got a little, upset about that. And he said, look, man, they're talking to people at the grassroots level. They know where the drugs are, the fights are. They know where all the prostitutes, they know everything. But because of their confidentiality, they're not necessarily tapped for that information. Somebody starts killing people on that campus. That's who I'm calling up because they know what's going on. So, it's a resource that parents love this because the data we have now, 27 million people, okay, up to 80% reduction in teen pregnancies when there's a campus chaplain, 30% increase in graduations. Most of those are young ladies that are finishing school. Then 0 suicide. People don't believe that. I know it's hard to believe it. And if we had 10 suicides or 100, I'll tell you. But in the schools with our chaplains, there has not been one reported suicide now for 14 years. There's one school district in Texas with 25,000 students. In 2022, 26 kids killed themselves. The youngest was that 6-year-old little girl I was telling you about, right? So who doesn't? And campuses are safer with a chaplain, the same as a military base. There's more cohesion on a base with a chaplain. So why wouldn't everybody want a chaplain?
Wow. Like when you just sharing those statistics, it really puts it in perspective. Because Rocky, as you're talking, what's really interesting, like we're okay having a chaplain on a sports team. We're okay having chaplains for the military and hospitals. And we're okay having chaplains in corporate America. You don't hear this big uproar and the stink. But when it comes to schools, there's this huge issue, and I understand that, the separation of church and state, but what I appreciate your heart is you're saying is we have a major crisis on our hands, and the chaplain is a trusted voice, is a trusted person to really be there for the students, to walk alongside of them, and to open up when things are going wrong and happening. And so my heart, I'm a product of public school education, and what I see going on and what I hear, it's alarming and it's sad. And I feel like we can't just leave these kids behind and act like it's not happening. Like, I know there's a lot of parents that are homeschooling homeschooling their children. There's a lot of parents that are sending their kids to private Christian schools and other, school organizations, which is fine. But I also think there's a large population of kids that still have to go to the public school, that don't have the access, don't have money. So I just so appreciated what you're sharing of how your chaplains are really on the front lines, being an advocate for the children. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's so many families, their only alternative is public school. And it's a shame when you think only just give you an idea. Recently, there was a superintendent that was proudly representing the number of graduates they had. It's about 1,000. I can't remember the exact number. But only 300 of those children could read proficiently. So they put 600 high school graduates into society that can't read. Oh my God, not to mention all the ones that failed. Or dropped out. I mean, we're kidding ourselves. The United States used to be the gold standard of education. We were the top for everything. Now we're the last. Of all the industrialized nations, we're the worst. Math scores, science, we can't even compete. Schools are so interested in brainwashing our kids with ideology, they can't get down to the basics of teaching them how to read. That's a huge issue. So, I don't want any politics in school. And the idea that chaplaincy is somehow political, or it's, we've heard ourselves called Christian nationalists. What it is straw man arguments based on hypotheticals. I have thousands of pages of documentation to support chaplaincy in the military, hospitals, even airports. The government pays chaplains to work in airports. So as you saw, sports teams, how can chaplains work in all those environments if there's unintended consequences, that there's no documentation? I know there could be a weirdo out there now and then, but the idea that there's unintended consequences happening in mass, that's not true. So people that go, oh, this is not right, we don't want them in school, blah, 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 like that. My question is, why do they not want a God witness of what's happening with trafficking, grooming, gender dysphoria? Maybe they don't want somebody eyes on all that kind of stuff. That's what I think's happened.
Wow. That's just what you're sharing is like putting in perspective, because, when I had a chance to hear about your organization with the National School Chaplains Association, it just dawned on me. I'm like, why aren't there public school chaplains? Like, I feel like it's sort of like a no-brainer. And I just think about, when I was in school, the people that I was able to reach out to or talk to in my own experience. I had a wonderful experience with public education. And I feel, just Rocky, to give you a little background, so big shout out to West Allegheny High School. Like, we didn't have any chaplains, but, in my chorus, we sang a lot of Christian songs. Every song that we sang was about Jesus, okay? Public school, sing about Jesus. We had the Silver Ring program. We had an assembly in high school that's about Jesus, right? And so in my community, it was like the fabric of our community, and it wasn't an issue. And we had a lot of different people that were in our school that they professed Jesus, they were Christians, and there was a lot of harmonious things that happened in my school that I had a wonderful experience. And so I just think it's asinine in a lot of ways to just be like, oh, we don't want this in our schools. But what are we doing? Because to me, there's a 911, there's an alarm going off, there's a big issues in school. One of my best friends, I've known her since I've been a little girl, she works for the Philadelphia Public School District. And even to hear what's been happening after, in wake of COVID-19 and the pandemic and just the trauma and the things that they're dealing with, I don't feel like we really have an understanding just the turmoil and the trauma that a lot of these students are in. And so I talk to my friend all the time, and she's opening up about, here's the issues that are going on in the school district. And I'm like, how are we sitting back and okay with this? Like, this is the next generation. We should care. And so grateful, Rocky, that you and all the chaplains and your whole team that's affiliated and associated, like, are stepping in a big way because it's needed. They're on God's eyes. They're like, God loves the children, and we got to stand up for them in this hour.
Well said.
Yeah. And so, Rocky, I just even want to just like pivot into like hearing more of like your passion in your heart and how even God directed you to this. And so, can you just share a little bit of your background, your story? I know I highlighted a little bit about, your former life of, you were like into drug smuggling, all these things, had divine intervention. So, can you tell us about your story and how God has gotten you to the place where you are? Because I truly find it fascinating.
Well, I kind of have a weird story because yes, I was a merchant marine officer. I was a commander, so I was, they would call me the captain of the ship, but actually I was a commander. But yeah, I was in Mexico, and I saw a lot of bad things happen. Really, a whole town got pushed off a cliff. So I went there to ask them, "What do you need?" On TV, they want blankets and food. So I went there to ask them what they needed. They wanted guns. They were mad. Well, I had a lot of, I had guns. So I said, "What do you got?" And so they had drugs. So I'm trading their drugs for weapons all over the ships, and it turned into be a civil war. I mean, it was quite the deal. So I get sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to overthrow the national government, drug smuggling, and some other, lesser charges. And I was supernaturally released. And so I'm charged. I'm so guilty, there's no trial. They just sentenced me. I mean, they hang three people. The day I show up, they hang three of them. So, I mean, it's pretty serious. And, they were going to kill me and all this stuff. Anyway, so there's only one other American in this prison. This is southern Mexico. The first time I saw him, they were electrocuting him. This is the kind of prison where they cut body parts off for corporal punishment. I mean, it's rough. So they come to get me, and because of some other things that happened, we thought they were just going to execute me, but not hang me because it was too public. So there's one other American there. So there's a cyclone fence. And so we're like shaking fingers through this fence. And while we're doing it, over my shoulder, he's looking right into the thin air of this audible voice that says, "I've set you free, now go do my work." So I look, he says, "What was that?" I look back over my shoulder. There's nothing there. But when that happened, I was being released. So obviously, they didn't kill me. I thought I got a get out of jail card from God to be a revolutionary, to support oppressed people in tyranny or whatever. So I was trying to serve God this whole time. I wasn't like the bad guy that got Jesus and got good. I was trying to do good the whole time. I wanted to help people. With a few months later, I'm involved in another revolution down in Bolivia. So, I realized that what because I was doing is really dangerous, as you can probably figure that out. So I just said, "Lord, this isn't how to do it. Revolution and all trying to throw tyranny out of people, and the injustices that we see every day with Ray, all that kind of stuff. It just bothered me so much. But I decided that Jesus, the way, was the only way to do it. And I wanted to help other people make quality life decisions and not make dumb decisions like I'd made.
Wow. That's like, just when you were sharing your story, just really sounds like a movie, truly incredible of like what God has brought you through in that divine intervention. And just your heart is like, Jesus, I just want to serve you. And so I just want to ask Rocky, did God like put like a father's heart just to care for children? Because I'm just curious, how did God spark this in your spirit to have this chaplaincy program to go into public schools? How did God get you there?
Well, we started with a where we started with a Bible program in public school in order to reach children. And that was pre-Latin American communism. So as the communism was sweeping through, we had to change this text program or book program. We had to separate it and support it with chaplains. And then the chaplain thing just exploded. So you know what? Just the innocence of children. But really, we went to Bolivia because there's so many abandoned children there. They're called street children. They're not true orphans. They just can't go home. So the way it kind of works, it doesn't work like this every way, but a woman has a man She has children with that man, and then just terrible abuse, really, of women. So she gets rid of that man. She has to get rid of that man's children. So then when the new man comes, he doesn't want the other man's children there. So the children know where the mother lives, but they just can't go home. So it creates this huge population of street children. And that's the group we were ministering to. And these kids are hitting the street every day. Brand new little kids. They're so, Sydney, there's like one story where this mother goes to a store, a grocery store, and she asked her little 7-year-old to wait outside for her. She goes out a back door. That little boy stood there for 3 days waiting for his mommy to come out. And somebody, I was pastoring at a church, and somebody from our church sees little boy, his pants are dirty, all that. He's out there whimpering, people. So she don't know what to do with him. So she brings him to church. So we started collecting these kids. I mean, these kids are hitting the street every day. So I'm asking God, what can we do? I mean, so it was the idea of how to go upstream and try to resolve the issue before they ever got to the street. Because once they get on the street, Sydney, I almost can't talk about it. They're taking these children's organs. They're selling them into slavery. They're going into slave camps. I mean, these children, when they get on the street, they're just victims. So the whole goal I met my wife in a combat zone in Nicaragua and Honduras. And so these war orphans, I thought they were collecting these kids, the UN or something. They weren't, these were traffickers. I didn't pick it up at first. So yeah, even though Sydney, I had this encounter with the Lord to go to work for him. When I saw the whole, Sydney, when you see an 8-year-old little boy with a big scar on his back where they took his kidney, and he knows when they find another person that needs his other kidney, he's going to be sacrificed. When you talk to a little boy with that level of fear, it changes who you are.
Wow. Just even as I'm just taking a moment to pause, because what you're sharing is really heavy. And I think for a lot of us here in America, it's unfathomable. Sometimes maybe we hear, about human trafficking and the traffickers and what's going on with these children. But Rocky, I can just tell by your compassion and just by your eyes is that you've seen horrific things. You've seen evil. And it's to the most innocent of the innocent, the most helpless of the helpless. And God is calling you and your wife to be hope. And so I just think it's truly beautiful that you didn't shy away from it. You didn't back down from it, but you're saying, you know what? Yes, Jesus, send me and I will be that light. I will be that love to help the young children. And, Rocky, just even thinking about when it comes to America here at home, have you seen those same horrific, atrocious things here in America that we would be shocked? And is that why, too, God said, I need you to start the NSCA, is to really be there for those children that people just they're forgotten about a lot of times?
Sydney, that's exactly why we came back to America. I love Latin America. We have 5 children, and one of our children is adopted. So from that sense, we're an interracial family. And we came back to America because really people are asleep at the wheel. If there's one school in the United States without trafficking, it would be a rare exception. It became political. Open border means the cartels are operating at large across the country. Trafficking, people think trafficking is like a child that's kidnapped. The vast majority of children that are being sexually exploited sleep in their home. They go to school because that's the safest place for a trafficked child. Because if you see a 13-year-old girl or boy when there should be in school, people are asking questions. They have been compromised some way to do sexual things against their will. And it sometimes it takes more than a year, sometimes up to 2 years for these groomers to put a child in that position. And it happens every day, every school. Some schools have classic symptoms. Like, for instance, Latin American children are the least likely to kill themselves. There's schools with Latin American kids killing themselves at record numbers. That's not the norm. And the same schools have high level of sexually transmitted disease. Somebody needs to go, what the hell's going on there? Well, there's kids being trafficked in those schools, and they just can't live with the pain and the guilt and everything. They just kill themselves. So, yeah, man, it's time to wake up. And the chaplains are the number one person to go in and intercept all this evil stuff because they're paying attention to those things. Now, this doesn't mean teachers and or law enforcement aren't doing their job, but it's not their job to be looking for these things. That's what the chaplain does.
Wow, Rocky, that's just really powerful, just really putting into perspective. And I just feel like, once again, I just have these moments where I feel like, sometimes, a lot of times in media or television or whatever, that we have to like make a comment and respond, and we're uncomfortable with silence. But I feel like because of the silence, that we're not talking about what's going on in these schools and what's happening with these children, it's out of control. And for me, I like, every time you're talking, it's just like the Holy Spirit is giving me these visuals, and I'm just thinking of that little boy, or thinking that little girl that is literally desperately crying out for help and doesn't know what to do. And what an honor, what a unique privilege that the chaplain has to be the eyes, to see what's going on. Because just like to your point, what you said, if you're a teacher, you're a principal, if you're a counselor, like you're focusing on helping the children, teaching them how to learn, but there's other things that are going on. And if in a lot of these public schools, we know there's overcrowding, there might be 30 students or more, in a school. So there's just a lot of different factors going on, and what an opportunity for the chaplains to go and just to see and just to speak. And, Rocky, I know that you're based in Texas, and just wanted to know, from your perspective of everything that we hear is going on with the border and different things, what would you see would you say it's in Texas or all over, that it's the same problems with this human trafficking with the students? What are your thoughts? What have you seen based on the data and research that you found?
It's everywhere. If you live in Michigan, if you live in Maine, Virginia, it's there. Somehow, and parents, you need to know who your children are communicating with, because these groomers are coming over as children and staging young people to put them in a position to get compromised. And once they do, they stay there because of fear. So, mom and dad, you need to pay attention to what's going on. Your kid's on the phone all the time. I know how that goes, but who are they communicating with? It is so dangerous. It's some trafficker they sent to prison the other day. He goes, well, if you sell drugs, you sell it one time, but when you sell kids, you can sell them over and over again. And the demand for that type of thing, people have no idea what's happening. They're just naive. They're just like, nice people going to church, trying to make money, raise your kids and all that. And the amount of evil that's going on, people just have a hard time comprehending it.
Yeah, it's like so true, Rocky, of just the comprehension, because it's not really in our face. I think in our society, unfortunately, with these dark evils are going on, and because, we're bombarded with news and just different things, we're actually very numb to it. So we're just like, oh, okay, that's really sad and bad. But when it comes to your front porch, when it comes to your home, then you're like, oh, this is a really large issue. This is a big problem. And, just recently on the Glory Hour, we did a whole show focused on human trafficking, and January was Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And something that I found I was shocking, I didn't even know this, here in Pennsylvania, that where our studios are located, even here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is ranked the 15th state with human trafficking. That there's in the I-80 corridor between like Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh. It's a hot spot now for human trafficking. And so it's really sad and it's really unfortunate. And it's just thinking about how many children have been lost, how many children are forgotten about. But I just think this is such an important topic, that, and knowing that what I'm going to say this is I appreciate is that you aren't just talking about it. You're not just being, raising your voice. You're saying, no, we're being a solution in the midst of it. And that's what I love. That's a kingdom focus. That's different from like, okay, we can talk about it and highlight it. But no, you're saying we got people, boots on the ground, that are dealing with this, having their eyes and ears are peeled open, that they're on assignment, on a divine assignment to help save these kids from the perils and the pit of evil. And that's truly incredible. And Rocky, just want to ask you, for those who are watching, what are some ways that we can partner with you and that we can pray for you? What are specific things that your organization needs?
One is we need chaplains. We need men and women who want to love on teachers and kids and be the solution, just like you said. And they could do that by going to our website. It's real easy, campuschaplains.org.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just like campuschaplains.org. And just, Rocky, I just want to thank you so much for just this very important conversation and just all that you shared, your wisdom, your insight, your revelation, because I truly believe that if you are a parent, if you're a grandparent, any family member, that you have a young person, whether they're in kindergarten through senior in high school and they're going to a public school or just schools in general, just to be aware of what's going on. And I just think it's really important for us to get behind you and the National School Chaplains Association. And I'm just believing that God is opening a door and is just bringing his light back into the classrooms because it is so needed. And I know that it is the enemy's devices and his scheme to snatch away this generation because there's so many deliverers. There's so many that are called in Gen Z right now to be a light for Jesus. And so, Rocky, thank you for all that you do. I'm just really grateful for this time that you took out. It has been an honor and a privilege to talk with you today.
Sydney, thank you for all you do for children in the kingdom of God. God bless you.
God bless you too, Rocky. Whew. I just needed to take a big breath. I'm still taking a moment to process the conversation just had with Rocky Malloy and just the work that they're doing, going out, being a light in the midst of the darkness. And I'll be honest with you all that there's certain conversations, certain interviews that I've done that there's just moments where I just feel like I'm taking a moment to sit still, taking a moment to really listen and hear, okay, God, what are you saying in the midst of this? Because I think, one of the concerns that I have for us, even as Christians, even as believers, is that we will numb ourselves and we don't want to hear about all the bad things that are happening. And even as Christians, we kind of want to go into our own place, our own community, do our own thing, and then forget about the world that's happening. And I just think about Jesus, is that if Jesus was living today, walking on the earth, I really believe that he would be running into the public school system. I really believe that he would want to be the chaplain that's there in the midst of those children that are desperately crying out for help. One thing I reference in our conversation is that one of my dearest friends, that she's an educator in the Philadelphia public school system. And we've had many conversations where she would talk to me about the trauma, talk to me about the horrific things that are happening and going on. And I think it's easy for us, right, that we can get so comfortable in our bubbles that we turn a blind eye to really the perils that are going on to so many children right now that are in our country. And that's why I'm just so thankful for people like Rocky. I'm so thankful for Rocky and his team at the National School Chaplain Association that are saying yes, that we're going to go and be on the front lines, that we're going to go and be a light in the midst of the darkness. We're going to go and listen to these children that are crying out for help, because there's something wrong in our nation. There's something wrong in our society when you have 6-year-old little children that want to take their own life. Let that sink in for a moment. A 6-year-old little girl and thousands of others who are going through so much. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't think about it. And they just want to end it all. That 6-year-old little girl, that's really sticking with me, because I think about how her and so many others that will never have a graduation. They won't have their dreams materialize. And they will never fully know the full purpose that they had, that God called them here to earth. And that makes me really sad. And I feel like it probably makes you really sad too. I'll be honest, I didn't know that this episode would take on such of a somber tone. But you know what? I think this is what God's glory is also about. You know, I think a lot of times as Christians, when we talk about glory, we think about revival and all these great moves happening. But it's very clear that glory is displayed in the midst of the darkness, that we are called to exemplify God's glory in the hardest places and the most ugliest of places, whether it's a public school or out in the world, no matter where God is calling us to, that's what we are called to be. And so I just want to encourage you that maybe today, that as you've watched and you listened to this conversation, that as you've listened to what Rocky was saying, as you've been listening to the stories and the testimonies that he shared, that you would be inspired to act, that you would be inspired to take a step. Maybe it is you're called to be a chaplain. Maybe you're called in some other sphere, but I just pray that you wouldn't just let this be another episode. I just pray this wouldn't be just a moment that you're ingesting into yourself. I pray that in the season that you would be like the Esther, that you would know that you are called for such a time as this. This is a whole generation that is suffering. This is a whole generation that is dying. And if we remain silent and we don't do anything about it, the blood is on our hands, church. As the ecclesia, we are called to take a stance and we are called to go out into hard, tough places. And so for me, I just even think about how can I get involved in my own community? How can I go and speak and be there for children who desperately need us? It's going to be uncomfortable and it's not going to be pretty, but Jesus is calling for us to be this like never before. And so I just pray as we conclude the end of this program that you would really think about the things that were shared, that you would really take it in and you wouldn't just pass it by. Because you know what, America, it's really easy for us to be comfortable. It's really easy for us to go back into our 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath house with the backyard with our dog and our cat and our 2.5 children. Maybe you got 4 children, 5 children. I don't know what your situation may look like. But we live in a culture where it's really easy to be comfortable instead of really looking like Christ. And so when we talk about being Christ-like, we need to pick up our cross and follow him. And we need to be willing to go into these hard places and to love on those that have been forgotten about. So today, I just pray that you think about those children that are in the public schools. You think about those kids that are going through so much and they're hurting. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. And I just want to share this quick story of these 3 girls that my husband and I actually had the honor and privilege of meeting, that when we used to volunteer at a small group out in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And it was so sad to see the trauma that they were in. Their mother was clearly addicted to drugs and just wanted us to go out and just take the girls anywhere. And I felt so bad because they had little brothers and I couldn't bring them in my car. And they would ask us, I was like, can we come with you? And I was like, we had a Honda Civic, like we can only fit like 5 people in the car. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart so bad to see the pain and what they were living in. And I wish that I could bring them home and we had a big enough house to bring them in. And I know they're just one of many kids. They were later put in the foster care system and I lost touch with one of them. And it breaks my heart. And I feel like it should break all of our hearts because children don't deserve this. So what are we going to do? How are we going to stand in the gap and love on these kids because they need us? There's such an orphan spirit that is happening all across this nation. And it is time for us to respond to the call and to love on children. Well, I'm so grateful for all of you that have tuned in and you listening to this. And I just pray that you would act. Let's go out, love, and save this next generation of children. I love you all, and I'll see you next time on The Glory Hour.